So, welcome to the Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. I'm Ward Simmons. I'm one of six Dharma leaders that rotate responsibility for leading. Anybody that doesn't have their cell phone muted, this would be an ideal time to do it. I include myself there. So I want to begin this evening's talk by asking you to close your eyes and listen to a short quote. This is from the Theravadan monk Ajahn Sucitto. In the unawakened state, we think of happiness as a commodity we have to work hard to get and hold on to. In awakening, we see happiness as simply what is left when we stop grasping. It is the ground we fall back on when the grasping ends. Okay, thank you. You can open your eyes now. So these words feel really true to me. And I want to focus for a minute on how it feels, these two different versions of this path that we walk. Ajahn Sucitto describes our relationship to happiness in the unawakened state as something that is hard to get and hard to hold on to. So just feel for a moment how that lands with you. For me, it sounds like a lot of work and a lot of striving, and it really doesn't have that much appeal. Contrast that with the relationship to happiness where we simply stop grasping, and the ground that we fall back on is that happiness. So now I'm getting a little more interested. I've titled this talk, A Positive Outlook on the Dharma. And my objective is to invite an orientation toward these teachings and the practice that are inviting and encouraging and sustainable. If we look at the many numbered lists that most of us know are included in the Dharma, we find that there are both positive lists and negative lists. So examples of negative lists might be the three poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion, and the three characteristics of existence, impermanence, suffering, and not self. Although those three don't have to be negative depending on your relationship to them, but we generally perceive them as negative. So to be sure, there are plenty of positive teachings in the Dharma. For example, there are the four Brahma Viharas, the exalted mind states of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And then there are the 10 paramis, these wholesome qualities of character, and I'm not going to list all of those tonight. But in this practice, there's a danger that we focus on the negatives to the exclusion of the positives. And that can produce a really heavy and burdensome relationship with the Dharma. Sometimes we'll hear people say that the Buddhist teachings just focus on the negative and that they're all about suffering. And that's why it's so important that we maintain awareness for ourselves of the view with which we approach these teachings. So there are a variety of reasons why we might fall prey to emphasizing the negative. First, the problem of human suffering is the basis of the teachings. That is a true statement. And so what is also true is that the intention of the focus, why that is the focus, is the aspiration to end suffering. The fourth noble truth is the path to the end of suffering, the way out of suffering. And what could be more positive than that? So a second reason it's easy to slip into a negative focus is that we as teachers, and I include myself here, sometimes fail to make clear the connection between the negatives we're trying to eliminate and the positive benefits that might result. So this is a passage from a well-respected contemporary teacher. I'm not going to name this teacher because this could be any teacher. Our lives, for the most part, are strung out between the thirst for pleasure and the fear of pain. We pass our days running after one and running away from the other, seldom enjoying the peace of contentment. Real satisfaction seems somehow always out of reach, just beyond the next horizon. Then, in the end, we have to die. We give up the identity we spend our whole life building to leave behind everything and everyone we love. So let me be quick to say that I believe those words are both true and eloquent. But I hope you see the point that if we're not deliberate about our focus on the benefits, then the negatives can seem to predominate. So there's another reason that we might be inclined to focus on the negatives, which is often referred to as negativity bias. Some of you will be familiar with that term. It's the innate human tendency to focus on the negative, and it arises primarily from the reptilian brain. This is the brainstem that's the residue of our early evolutionary development. It's what Rick Hansen in his book Buddha's Brain refers to as the lizard, squirrel, monkey brain. This part of the brain is the part that focuses primarily on keeping the organism, that is us, fed and safe and procreating. And it's highly inclined to be reactive and not reflective. Now, in the past, this tendency served us well. The humans who were fearful and cautious would go on high alert when they heard a sound, and they'd be prepared to either fight or take flight. And those who dismissed the sound as probably just a branch falling in the woods, they were not so well positioned when the tiger jumped out of the bushes. And so in the end, the fearful and the cautious were more likely to survive and pass their genes on, as opposed to those that were relaxed and not so worried. So the result is we're a little bit cautious and fearful as a species. We are genetically predisposed to finding the fault and the danger in any situation. The areas of the brain that evolved later, they handle the more complex functions: emotional regulation, compassion, reflection. And in one very real sense, meditation practice is the process of retraining the brain to refrain from the initial lizard brain response and permit the higher functioning areas of the brain to weigh in on a situation. So let's look at how we might work with our Dharma practice in a more positive light. The teaching on the three poisons, greed, hatred, and delusion, is a good example. We can see them in operation in every moment of our experience. So the definition in the suttas of a fully awakened being, an arhat, is one who has completely eradicated greed, hatred, and delusion, one in whom these poisons can never again arise. So this sounds like a pretty challenging achievement, and I think it is. But for me, any movement in that direction, I'll take it. I don't have to get 100%. If I can get 50% or 20% or 5%, I'll take that deal. So as we sit quietly in meditation, the mind begins to slow down and we can look more carefully at each moment of experience. This is when we start to notice how pervasive the poisons are in our mental activity. But if we stop there, it's not a very uplifting practice. Here is where we can turn our attention to the alternatives to the poisons. So let's pause for a minute and just talk about these three terms, greed, hatred, and delusion. They're not precise and complete descriptors of every possible unwholesome mind state. They are really general categories under which many mind states can fall. Greed is an umbrella that can include states of desire, wanting, envy, lust, pride, egoism. Hatred can include any aversive mind states: anger, disgust, spite, bitterness, mean-spiritedness. And delusion includes ignorance, fantasy, hallucination, and maybe most descriptive, confusion. When you encounter an unwholesome mind state, while it may not fit neatly into one of these three broad categories, just see which umbrella term it seems closest to, which seems like it's most related to. One important way to do that is to pay attention to the energetic feel of the state. What does this feel like in my body? So let's look at these three and see how we can relate to them in a positive way. Greed, the traditional word greed carries a little bit of a narrow connotation to me. It sounds more like it's just about money and possessions. Another word that's often used is desire, which broadens it out a little bit. The classical term for the alternative to greed, the positive that we want to cultivate and be aware of, is, guess what? Non-greed. Wow. Also often rendered as generosity or renunciation. Generosity has an overtone of relinquishing something and doing so for the good of another. So we might think of charitable contributions to worthwhile organizations. But generosity really goes beyond material possessions. We can be generous with our time and attention. We can have a generous attitude toward others whose actions might seem suspect. We can give them the benefit of the doubt until we know otherwise. Renunciation, that's not a popular word. It's kind of something that a lot of people, I don't want to really have anything to do with that. It carries with it the implication that we're relinquishing primarily for the sake of our own well-being. So think about a monastic who gives away all their worldly possessions when they enter an order. But again, beyond material possessions, we can practice renunciation with respect to many things: pride, the need to be right, the need to have our own way. So the common denominator among those is non-wanting. And this has a very central and a very lawful connection to the core of the Buddhist teachings, the Four Noble Truths. Some of you are very familiar with the Four Noble Truths, but I'm just going to take a moment and recite them in case you're not. The first is there is dukkha. That's a Pali word that's usually translated as unsatisfactoriness or stress or suffering. There is dukkha in the human experience. The second truth is this dukkha has a cause, and the cause is attachment. The third truth is that to whatever extent we can reduce or eliminate our attachments, to whatever extent we can reduce or eliminate our attachments, our dukkha will be reduced accordingly. And the fourth truth is there is a path. There are instructions on how to go about this. The path leading to the reduction or elimination of dukkha, the Noble Eightfold Path. So those are the Four Noble Truths. And this points directly to the common denominator of non-greed, which is non-wanting. This is another way of saying non-attachment, the goal of the path. So moving on from greed to hatred, the word hatred, in my mind, carries quite a lot of intensity. Another effective term is aversion, which is less intense, but I think still accurate. The classical term is, for the alternative, is guess what? Non-hatred. It's not too tricky. This is also often referred to as loving kindness or goodwill. Loving kindness is sometimes defined as unconditional positive regard for all beings. It carries with it a detachment as opposed to attached love. So the teacher Jetsumna Tenzin Palmo puts it this way: attachment is the very opposite of love. Love says, I want you to be happy. Attachment says, I want you to make me happy. And goodwill is a wish for all beings to flourish and thrive. So as with non-greed, the common denominator with non-hatred is non-wanting. Greed is wanting things to be a certain way. Hatred is wanting things to not be a certain way. They're two sides of the same coin of wanting. Delusion is a little bit more complicated. When we're lost in delusion, we can't see that we're lost in delusion. We don't know what we don't know. And for this reason, delusion is understood to be the most difficult of the three poisons. The classical term for the alternative to delusion is, guess what? Non-delusion, often referred to as insight or wisdom. Now, the term insight is used in many ways. We may be meditating and we may have a realization about some relationship in our lives. Maybe we see that the other person is triggering some long-standing pattern in our personality. So that kind of insight can be very useful, and I'm not diminishing the value of that kind of insight. But in the context of the Dharma, insight refers specifically to insight into the three universal characteristics of existence: impermanence, suffering, and not self. Wisdom, the word wisdom, represents the culmination of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's the clear seeing that enables us to avoid becoming ensnared in the wanting poisons of greed and hatred. The nature of insight and wisdom is fundamentally different from generosity, renunciation, loving kindness, and goodwill. We can't simply sit down and make a decision to achieve insight or wisdom. They arise as the fruit of the practice, as the result of this path. So as you work with these three poisons of greed, hatred, and delusion, or of any unskillful mind states, see if you can reframe them. Instead of looking for the unwanted, see if you can focus on the more wholesome traits to which you aspire. Nature abhors a vacuum, and it will fill it immediately. If we're successful in eliminating an unwholesome state that has arisen, there's a 50-50 chance that the next state that arises is going to be, guess what? Unwholesome. A better alternative is to intentionally fill the vacuum with a wholesome state. Generosity, loving kindness, insight, renunciation, goodwill, or wisdom. To the extent that we actively cultivate wholesome states, there's no ground on which the unwholesome can establish itself. So recognize the unwholesome, negative states and conditions that are present, but don't stop there. Investigate carefully what you're experiencing, identify its alternative, and place your attention there. As we train our minds in this way, they will become more and more accustomed, and this will be our natural reaction. As the Buddha said, whatever a person thinks and ponders upon, that will become the inclination of her mind. The result will be a meditation practice and a life with more happiness and ease and less efforting and striving. I'll close with a quote from Ajahn Amaro in his book, Finding the Missing Piece. I hope this frames the approach to meditation that can bring us ease and happiness, not anxiety and strife. And Ajahn Amaro says, the point of meditation is not just to be able to sit for a long period of time unconcerned with sore knees, or to make the breath sacred, even though it is central and significant. The point is to live as a harmonious human being, as a blessing for oneself and others, to make one's life as meaningful as possible. I'll offer that for your consideration.